fortunately, has got this sort of like extracurricular, vibe to it. Yeah, it's like, oh well, even that says sort of an extra. Some people go there, but it's not necessary. It's sort of maybe like injected into the poem rather than being, or into the book, rather than being the essential story, or what
substantial literature.
Yeah, and so I think that's what I'm getting at there. Yeah.
Well, here's another seminar member on the same passage. They read it the first time, and the word that comes to mind, lingering. They read it a second time. They write one sentence. Yes, the trip that seems like a prison, though one is supposed to be exulting in the freedom of the open road. They read it a third time and write a paragraph. There is a pattern between this passage and the first passage about the grandmother's ghost. Things that will not go away. Except this passage is more aggressive. A present that will not go away. And then reading it a fourth time and writing in a stream of consciousness vein. This passage serves for me as a metaphor for times that cannot pass too quickly. How many times have I tried to console someone who is living through hardship? Quote, this time too will pass, end of quote. But to them, of course, it seems as though it will go on forever. Nevertheless, sometimes the past does not go away. Sometimes it remains present. I was thinking about war yesterday. When I was a young boy in the 1960s, growing up in a prosperous blue-collar neighborhood, World War II was still present. We talked about it as if it had just happened. As a young man visiting the deep hollers of West Virginia, I found that the American Civil War was still very much present. Fallen soldiers from a person's lineage could be talked about as if they had just defended the homeland and paid the ultimate price last week. And then I think of my country today fighting two wars that few talk about in the course of daily life, in spite of thousands of losses and hundreds of thousands risking death bravely. To spend any time dwelling on what our countrymen are doing on the other side of the world would be too much unpleasantry in the course of daily life. World War II was more present 2 decades later than today's wars are in their own time. How can this be? Time, it would be seen, is quite malleable. But I suspect that as individuals, we do not have much control over what shape it will take. I wondered in reading the novel, we talk about Mother Nature and who is Father? Father Time. I realize the role, the pivotal role that the Father plays, but I had the impression that time is the principal protagonist. Does that make any kind of sense?
Definitely, yeah. I think that the idea, or again, it goes back to the surfaces and my initial impulse idea that hopefully goes through of that I guess the inclusiveness of the present moment of the past, and also therefore I think of the future too, so I'm the way that the stories of Henry and the father emerge. Yes, they're important, and then specifically, of course, the father stories, but the way that they emerge through the framing of the unnamed narrator's voice, I think, is very much linked, or hopefully, to idea of the way that time works and through memory and through framing devices of stories and of memory. So yeah, I think that.
A question, first technical. How many copies already printed of your, if you are aware of your book?
I'm not sure. I know that there was over 100,000 of D&M copies, which is this version of them, which is pretty amazing.
For today. Yeah, and then another question. We had the privilege to read it, for me also first time, second another book, thanks to Dr. Cornett, because he gave us like a digested, because the book was digested by him. So I would like to compare situation. If I would go to the bookstore and just, okay, killing time 1 hour, let me choose some book for traveling. So I look at the first pages, something further, another. Probably I will not pick up this book. But then it was like what we read. It was very intense. When I said, wow, come on, it's quite philosophical, quite deep. So I would like to ask your question, if those paragraphs chosen by Dr. Cornett, you were really thinking much, it was like a condensation of your, like a summarization, so it was deep, how he chose it, because it was paying my interest. Yeah, then I started to read after a week, okay, those few fragments. So my advice is, nice suggestion. I treat this book as because very big changes as a mosaic, like a Canadian, multicultural, very different elements here. What about just using different characters, like writing something in New Roman, now something in Gothic, another? What will be reflecting different, pace of reading, or something what is really you must read few times in different, like in bold or another. It will be very simple, but I mean, because you use...
actually, different fonts.
Yeah, different fonts, yeah, okay. And because you use the interpunction another, that's for me, as an English second language, is more difficult, it's too subtle. I would prefer with different, the fonts and other things.
So what would you be drawing out with the different fonts? I'm not sure if I understand, like the different...
Because you have in one person, it's like a father, then you as a narrator, there's another.
Okay.
So that would be easier, and then to picture this. So you will have this.
Interesting. Do you know that Faulkner is the son, or yes,
The Sound of the Fury.
Sound of the Fury, was the color coded idea.
We have this.
Yeah.
I didn't know. This what I was coming.
Yeah. Well, his original notion, I mean, was that the Sound and the Fury, which has a lot of intersecting voices, was going to be color coded, and his publishers, I mean, this is back in the early, like 100 years ago, and they were like, we really can't do that. But I thought that was so interesting that's what. So yeah, I think. I'm not sure about my own impulse is always, even sometimes italics to me seems jarring, and I think that there's different.
So it's very tiny.
Yeah.
It's very tiny, so I skip it because I can't read it.
Yeah.
So it defeats the purpose.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I just always like I have a sense of wanting that to be like the distinctions to be implicit in the reading and in the comprehending of it, rather than in any visual markings on the page. But I think that that might be just a phase. I don't know. I think because I think appreciate when people do it and can pull it off, and that it obviously is really essential in some ways. So I can't see, and then to the extreme of like Faulkner wanted to do that, and I was like, well, it seems so nuts to me, and I was just like, but that there's obviously like so much in design and in and what you say, like, well, you read it as well, so then just the ways that we're affected by, like, physiologically, as well as obviously just the information that we're getting from the design is really crucial to our experience too. So there's just so much richness there that I don't tend to think about or tap in on. But there's a lot.
Could be
Yeah.
explored, yeah, eventually.
I found
Yes.
I found the breaking of the book into small sections that are literally about this big to be extremely helpful. And the space and the little symbol in front of each
Nice.
subsection, that helped me to keep track of what was happening and where thoughts were stopping and new thoughts were beginning.
Oh, good. Okay.
And,
Yeah, someone just asked me if that, again, going back to this notion that I'm a poet turned novelist, is that that she said, oh, so is it because you're a poet that that you've done this, right? That you've sort of looked, and I said, these brief segments, and and that you see it, and it was a nice. I like that idea that would be why, or that I was seeing or had crafted the novel as like little brief poems. I like that idea, but it's just not how it happened. In fact, it was the reverse. Like I was saying, that it was a real process of many different stages of looking at it and being like, okay, no, seriously, this time, like, what is the book about? And and taking it, and crafting it from this large amorphous mass into the.
I literally imagined you writing these blurbs as they came to you over the course of time and pinning them to the wall and then rearranging the wall.
Oh, wow. No, very different, but that's interesting. And yeah, because it really was the opposite of just having a lot that I just had to, and then obviously then there was some rearranging of but that was, I think, far less the process than just reduction.
Because it jumps from place and time constantly, without any regard to chronology, which I found really, really interesting. I think that's part of the challenge, maybe. But it seemed like a life is described almost like the pieces of a puzzle scattered on the floor, kind of thing.
That's a good description.
Yeah.
And there's also references throughout the book, especially toward the end, about pieces, body parts and fragments of memories and whatever rolled up Kleenexes and stuff that you find around the house. You just parts, pieces, fragments. And metaphorically speaking, do you feel at any point in our lives that we complete the puzzle, or is it always going to be the pieces on the floor that we're trying to? Oh yeah, I can see that image emerging. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know. Well, I think that maybe I think I would say no, but then I think that I would say that the idea of like the process and impulse towards resolution that we were talking about, that there is always this impulse to try to recuperate from those pieces a whole, or and that maybe that's too what the poem and the especially the father's attempt to write the poem is getting at for me too, is that and he says. And the daughter, and also in terms of that process too, the daughter, the father finds this poem that she had written in the 10th grade, and it's very dissatisfying to her. She finds it really oversimplified and sort of just awful. That sort of like writing that you find in a drawer that you just wish you hadn't done. And the father appreciates it, and he says, I think it's a nice little poem. And she says, well, I don't want to have written a nice little poem. She wants more. She wants to have recuperated more. She wants a bigger picture. She wants, that's part of her process of wanting to, and then, hopefully perhaps that can go back to, okay, what is she doing now? She's trying to do more than the nice little poem with her own process of recording her father's stories, but then then when the father or no, I guess he says but don't be too. Then write another one. He says, but don't be too sad. Be like Whitman. He always made the most of everything. So this